Harper's Kennel Stella, Missouri is proud to be sponsoring this portion of broadcasting on KNEO. Owned by Judy and Danny Harper, Harper's Kennel of Stella, Missouri specializes in French Bulldogs. For more information, the phone number is 417-628-3083.
Welcome to Crosspoint. An interactive program featuring ministers and leaders of the Christian community addressing the issues that are challenging the church today. Here's your host, Mark Taylor.
Nothing can explain when suddenly one's life is turned upside down. And that's what happened to my guest today, Thomas Caldwell, who was in Washington, D.C. with his wife on January the 6th, 2021, and the events that changed their life and what followed after that. Welcome to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor. Well, welcome to today's program, folks. We got a really interesting program, one that I've been wanting to talk with someone about for a while, someone that was actually in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th of 2021. Gentlemen, we're talking today, Thomas Caldwell. He was there, and he found out he went back as well because he was one of those that got caught in all of that. Well, let's let him tell the story. And Tom, thanks for being with us today here in Crosspoint.
Thank you for inviting me today.
Well, your book here has got a lot of information in it. And, folks, when you pick up a copy of this book, it's entitled The Mouths of the Wicked. And you'll find out and see just, well, it sounds a little scary, some of the stuff you learn about what our government is capable of doing. And if you don't mind, Tom, I'm going to read right here in the first part of it. And it says, if there was ever another story, a very personal story of the Capitol Hill protest of January 6, 2021, it's never been told. What if you'd been manipulated into believing that one of the biggest frauds in American history had taken place? And what if the most powerful people threw away the rule of law and the Constitution that day? And what if the events of January the 6th were the start of something sinister, a homegrown terror campaign against peaceful citizens? And then you said, I have been politically active as a career naval officer and usually assigned far from home. You went down here further to say that you did vote in the 2020 election and you voted for President Trump. And for the first time in your experience, you, as scores of millions, had doubts about the election's honesty. And you go on then to the next page, you tell us a little bit about what happened. And basically, you were invited to come into the White House, or not the White House, but into the Capitol. You were invited to come in. You were supposed to go and hear some speeches or something. So you and your wife thought, well, why not? We'll go in and hear what they got to say. And they actually invited you in. Is that correct?
Well, that's not entirely correct. I never went into the Capitol that day, and that's one of the things that makes my story so very unique. Never went in, never committed any violence, nor did I see any that day. I was with my wife all day that day. It was a festive crowd that day. We went to Washington not to stir up any trouble, but to say goodbye to a president that we thought did a pretty good job under some very difficult circumstances. And the crowd that day, I call it a love fest. There was a couple 100,000 people there. What your listeners should know is that the reason that people went towards the U.S. Capitol that day, and again, I did not go in there, though many people were invited through open doors by officers, Capitol police officers. The reason we went down there is that the mayor of Washington, D.C. had issued permits for a number of conservative and Christian speakers to speak on temporary stages erected for the purpose on the grounds of the Capitol. After listening to the president, those events were going to begin. There were people down there like Simone Gold and others who were going to talk to the crowd that was anticipated to come there. So that is why I stumped along with my cane down Constitution Avenue to go down to the Capitol with my wife on a very, very cold day. I never even went on the Capitol grounds for most of the afternoon. We sat at a place called the Peace Monument, or the Peace Fountain, which, again, it's about 300 yards away from the Capitol. And for all of this, we were there. We went home 2 weeks later with no warning and with no cause, no predication that was true. The FBI SWAT team attacked our farmhouse and rousted us out at gunpoint in the pre-dawn hours of the 19th of January, 2021. I was later tortured in prison and threatened with life imprisonment by the DOJ with no evidence of wrongdoing, I would later endure a 10-week-long jury trial and years of persecution. And my first lawyer said it, and this should chill everyone. The DOJ knows you're innocent, Tom, but they don't care.
Well, they were trying to make a point, weren't they, of something? What was that point that they were trying to get off? Because that's the way they did a lot of folks, didn't they?
Absolutely true. And the January 6th events have been so twisted. I tried in this book that I wrote to tell about my story. I try to stay in my lane because there is enough chicanery and huckstery and sadism and stuff to go around across thousands of Americans. But this is part of a larger terror campaign to shut the American people up and to manipulate their point of view. It is a great psychological campaign. I spent 2 decades on active duty in service to our country as a United States Navy officer, and I worked in psychological ops and Navy intelligence. I always joke and say Navy and intelligence are mutually exclusive terms. There's a lot of stupid stuff that happens in the military. But I could see what was happening, and since then, there have been documents, mostly unseen by the American public, which have come out, and Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, has declassified this to show that the Biden administration was targeting people of faith. I'm a devout Christian. People of faith, people who wanted to protest, and I bring the receipts. And by that, what I mean is I have all of the evidence that was false against me that was presented at trial. I have all the evidence that the judge would not allow to be given to the jury. I have the documentation of all of this and what was going on behind the scenes. I have it not only for myself, but for a lot of other people who were at trial with me, members of the Oath Keepers, for example, an organization that is not a white supremacist organization or a radical organization, of which I was never a member. But I have all this, and I said somebody has to tell the truth. I wrote the book to tell the truth, to present it in such a way that there's notes and references. I want somebody to try to go back and fact check me, because you're going to be astonished. But the other thing I wanted to do here is to glorify God, because when truth and innocence don't matter in our legal system, you better have another plan. And that plan is the first one that my wife and I turned to, and that was Jesus Christ. He never fails us, even though the ways and the institutions of man often do.
Yeah, I noticed in there in the chapter you got Darkness and Terror Tower, you talked about there you didn't have any medications, and there were some areas where you needed those medications, and you said, God, please stop this, and you said, as I lay there on a slab, reciting without effect the Lord's Prayer, in pain. And so that had to be difficult because you were in solitary confinement too, right?
That's correct. I am a disabled vet. I'm busted up pretty badly. I say there's enough metal holding my body together that if you melted it down, you can make a pretty good frame for a coffee table for your front room. And I'm only actually functional because of a very unique blend of prescription medicines and notions and potions and lotions, which allow me to function. The very first thing they did when they dragged me away to prison, again, arrested on false predication. There was no evidence that I had done anything wrong. It was part of a bigger thing that they were going to do. The first thing they did was take away any access to any medicines or any doctors or anything like that. They stripped me naked, of course, and they had sort of an physically intrusive welcome to prison, if you know what I mean, conducted by the guards, and they gave me a threadbare jumpsuit. They put me in a 6x9 concrete coffin-like cell. That was solitary confinement with a solid steel door on one side and constantly cold air blowing in. The cold concrete floor was my bed for the entire time I was incarcerated. I went through a lot of physical abuse, also just had dirty water at the sink to drink. I won't even call what they gave us as sustenance any kind of food or sustenance as I've come to understand it. And one of the worst aspects was when they plunged me into total darkness. When you're in so much darkness, it's kind of like taking a tourist trip to Mammoth Cave down in Kentucky or something like that, and they turn off the lights to show you what it's like to not have any light. That is terrifying. Imagine that for day after day after day. And I'll tell you what, the demonic things that come out of the walls to torment you in a situation like that, let me tell you what, in my case, they were not figments of my imagination. Probably the worst part is what you just alluded to, which was members of the U.S. Marshal Service actually came and checked me out of the jail after I continued to refuse to plead to something that I didn't do to make the pain and the misery stop. They took me out, double handcuffs in front. Those handcuffs were affixed to a heavy chain around my waist. I had slave shackles on my ankles. They took me down a dirt road in Virginia in the countryside, threw me face down, and while one of them held my legs apart by standing there with his legs between mine, another kicked me repeatedly in the groin and said, "Where's your sky daddy, boy? Where is your Christ now?" And for your listeners, I think that underscores the idea that we are in a spiritual battle.
Yeah. Well, why do you feel like sometimes that you were, they didn't get everybody involved. They got a lot of people, though, but you believe that the government did arrest you, in your hindsight, looking back at that. What do you think it was that they picked you?
I think that one of the things the government wanted to do, and this is an old tactic, when they want to get people riled up, they have to focus the ire of the public on a person or on groups. Now, I talked about this Oath Keepers organization, which is really it was a national public service organization. They're the ones who are first on the ground when there is a natural disaster. Long before FEMA gets there, Oath Keepers are there to help. There was another group called the Proud Boys. I'll stay away from talking about the Proud Boys because I really don't know anything about them. But to answer your question, I had actually met a couple of members of the Oath Keepers. People might recall, or maybe they don't even know, that the Oath Keepers were called upon to provide security services for people like Roger Stone and other conservatives and Christian speakers at various events that summer of 2020 when our cities were in flames. And I met them as part of the Million MAGA March. And one of the people that I met, I should point out that the Oath Keepers are primarily veterans and current and former law enforcement officers. These are the kind of people that I support wholeheartedly. Well, one of them, when she left, she was actually a veteran who had served with a Ranger Battalion in Afghanistan. When she left the area, I said, "Hey, look, if you're ever broken down in the Washington, D.C. area, give me a call, take my phone number." The people in the Department of Justice don't know or they don't care that veterans often refer to each other by the rank they held on active duty. So as she walked away, she had my phone number in her phone, and she put in, because I was a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, she put my number in as Commander Tom. 2 weeks after January 6th, when they had flashbanged her home and grabbed her phone, they started going through the contacts. And within 2 hours of seizing her phone, an FBI special agent named Michael Palian had a federal judge's signature on an arrest warrant for me as Commander Tom, commander of the Oath Keepers and commander of the attack on the Capitol. You can't make it up, and it was proved through discovery.
Well, your wife now was arrested too, but she wasn't locked up for that long a time, was she?
No, actually, Sharon was not arrested, and that is one of the amazing things of all this, because she and I did exactly the same thing that day. I had the most exhaustive history of our actions on January 6th of anybody that you will ever meet. Hundreds of photos and videos, selfies, and what was going on around us. She was fearful for years that they would come and take her away. But even though we did exactly the same thing, they never came after her. And that was a tremendous blessing in so many ways, because the abuse that I suffered, I just don't know how I would have dealt with it psychologically to know that she was going through the same kind of thing. They put her through enough, if you'll pardon the expression, absolute hell over the 5 years of our being attacked to have cycled that sort of physical abuse and incarceration into the equation would have been probably more than either she or I could bear.
And then, of course, your life's turned upside down when you have to start incurring all these expenses to try to fight this, because you did have to do this. Did they give you an attorney, or did that go anywhere if they did, or did you have to get your own, and how could you even really trust somebody?
Right, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. No, we were not offered that. Sharon, neither she nor I have ever been in trouble with the law before, never so much as a parking ticket at that time. And so she was scrambling while her man was in prison. She couldn't even talk to me for a while after I was locked up, days. And she's scrambling, trying to find an attorney. How does someone find a criminal defense attorney who is authorized to practice law before the federal bench? Because these were federal charges now coming down on us. I don't know anybody. I didn't have anybody on speed dial at that time. And she was gathering up money just to try to get somebody who would bother to take the case. I would point out that the vast majority of January 6th defendants could not find anybody who was willing to take their part. Sometimes they got a less than enthusiastic, shall I say, public defender, but it was tough. And when Sharon had to scramble to come up with $100,000 for a retainer for a lawyer who did not do a good job, eventually we had to move on from him. I mean, who has $100,000 laying around? Sharon and I are older folks. We're living peacefully on a farm in the Shenandoah Valley. It was tough. The only way that we could actually get an attorney was the Lord sent us one. And I can tell you more about that, but even when I was finally released from prison, this is before we ever went to trial, I came home to, our house had been torn up by the FBI people who were searching for something, I don't know what, but media attacks. We were locked down at home. I had no social contact, couldn't have a cell phone, couldn't be on the internet, but worse than that, our savings were wiped out. Our credit was ruined. With a phone call from the Department of Justice, they made sure that we couldn't even borrow against the farm. They canceled our insurance, including our auto insurance, good old USAA that crows about how much they love veterans, 46 years of paying premiums to them. One phone call from the DOJ stopped it. The DOJ illegally stopped my Social Security benefits and my military disability pay. So we had no money coming in at all. They also stopped my military medical benefits, and by extension, Sharon's too, because she's a dependent, you see. The process was part of the punishment and the terror campaign inflicted upon us, and likely others too.
Well, folks, we've got an interesting story today. Stay with us. We're going to have more right after this. This is Mark Taylor. If you miss a broadcast of Crosspoint, you can always go to our website at www.kneo.org and click on the programs page. There you can access the current Crosspoint program as well as the last 4 programs that have been aired. Never miss another Crosspoint program again. Go to www.kneo.org today. And welcome back to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor. Thomas Caldwell is with me today. We're talking about his time when January 6th. It all started in 2021. The book's entitled The Mouths of the Wicked. And it's a true story of January 6th story of corruption, persecution, survival, and victory. Now, Thomas, if people wanted to find out more about this book, how do they go about doing that?
The best way to do it is to go to puffinpublishers.com. That's Puffin, Puffin, like the seabird. Puffinpublishers.com. You can find out more about the book, more about the story. You can read some reviews. A lot of people like to do that first, and you can purchase it right there. We still have not gotten on Amazon. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think part of it is the story that I'm telling, which is politically charged in some people's minds. I don't intend it to be. It's not a revenge book or anything like that, but it's also a Christian book. And in fact, many publishers wouldn't touch this book for the same reason. There's one, and decorum will keep me from naming it here, who you wouldn't expect, who routinely publishes books by like Bongino and Patel, and they said, well, we might publish your book, but, you know, you're going to have to get rid of some of that Jesus stuff. You can imagine what I said to them. I said, thank you very much, but I'm going to move on. Yeah. But Huffin Publishers did not hesitate. And that's the place to go to find out more about this book and order it. It's in a paperback and ebook format.
All right. Now, I'm looking here, Last Chance, that's another title of one of your chapters here, and page 106, it says there was no exercise or recreation period available in the prison. It was a dumping ground. And all the detainees that had rights, these rights were willfully violated. So you basically were locked up without any rights at all? I mean, you couldn't see an attorney when you needed to. You had to wait on this and that, or your lights were turned out. You slept on the floor. I mean, this is kind of above and beyond. Somebody was trying to get a point across to you, were they not?
I think so. And in writing this book, I'm trying to get a point across too.
Sure,
you know,
sure.
I wrote about my time incarcerated that we're discussing right now as being in hell. And I started writing about what Sharon and I were going through even when I was locked down, though I had to smuggle out letters and notes to Sharon. Months after I had gotten out and we were deeply involved in this 5-year ordeal, I was dumbfounded at the words I had used to describe what was happening. I was isolated, tortured, sometimes kept in the darkness in a windowless, lightless room. It wasn't until I determined I'm going to read the Bible and study it from cover to cover that the words I had selected, which incidentally I never changed before publishing the book, jumped out to me as being scriptural. In Matthew 8, hell was described as darkness. Revelation says so too. In hell you desire comfort. The book of Luke, I think it's Luke 16, calls hell a place of torment. And yes, I experienced that. And the demonic things that I mentioned before. This was a glimpse of what the Bible teaches us about hell. And I saw it. I saw it, Mark. Satan is at work with a hell prepared for him that he wants to lure us into. Is it so far-fetched, I ask, to think that those who are influenced by him in our society today would try to create what they know here on earth to mirror the underworld? That was my experience.
And while you're in there, you did not that often ever have meeting or be around other people that were in there for the same reasons?
That's correct. There was nobody that I ever knew of who was incarcerated in that same facility, a rotten little place called the Central Virginia Regional Jail in Orange, Virginia, who was involved in January 6th whatsoever. There were lots of people in there for lots of other things. And interestingly enough, the other inmates, even though we were in solitary confinement in concrete boxes stacked one upon the other, row upon row, in much the same way as our heroes in Vietnam who were kept in prison conditions in solitary and the Hanoi Hilton and places like that, they do find a way to communicate sometimes. And it was amazing to see how so many of these people who could make contact with me bucked me up. And I talk about that a little bit in the book, but there was so much more to tell. And that support in those darkest times, as well as being able to occasionally get a phone call with Sharon where we prayed together on the phone, where she read scripture to me when the prison guards would not allow me to have a Bible of my own to read. These things were essential to keep me grounded and keep me hanging on and keep my shaken faith secured for another day, one day at a time.
Yeah. And then you have a place where all these cards, your credit cards, everything's gone. You basically have no way to support yourself in what's going on. So I'm assuming that family or friends or somebody like that had to step in and help out in those areas. But in doing that, we can all see, you felt it, the power of how somebody can come in and completely destroy your life and discredit your life and keep you from having anything. That's like an Antichrist government. You know, we hear about the Antichrist, but that's like an Antichrist. You can't buy, you can't sell, you can't do anything because they've cut all the means off of you to do that. And you either cooperate with them or you're not going to get anything.
It's part of the terror that they want to inflict. For my divergent views, including adherence to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Holy Bible. I would ask anyone who's listening to our conversation, how would you feel? How would you deal with it? Knowing that you're innocent, but no one wants to listen. Every time you turn on the television, it's more fibs about you. Where do you go? Well, how do you handle that? Yes, our local community, people that actually knew us, they knew that was all a bunch of hooey. They absolutely did. And I call it the covered dish legion of believers who came to us and they said, oh, yeah, well, we just had a little extra food. We thought we'd bring it over. And they're bringing over a couple of gallons of homemade soups and chilies and steaks and burgers and stuff. And, during all of this, I'm going to talk about somebody who a lot of people think may have gone off the rails, a gentleman named Tucker Carlson. When he was still on Fox News, he actually had my wife Sharon and me on his television program, his evening show that he had on Fox. Later, he even had us both on his hour-long show that still is there on the pay Fox channel. You can go back and you can watch it too. When we were still reeling, I was just recently out of prison, of course, and because he let us have about 4 minutes to talk to his nationwide audience, things changed. Things changed, Mark. And what happened is we were inundated with cards and letters of support and love from people who shared their favorite scriptures and their encouragement. And yes, a dollar here, a dollar there, and sometimes more to keep the lights on, to keep our defense team running, because you know what? Freedom is not free. We talk about that in terms of the United States military and our brave men and women who are out there on the pointy end of the spear of freedom. But in this country, defending yourself is monstrously expensive, especially when you have an entire federal bureaucracy coming down on your head. But these people reached out to us. There are hundreds of these good brothers and sisters with whom I still regularly correspond. These are people who, as we are able to, Sharon and I go out and we get my rickety old 20-something-year-old car and we drive and we meet these folks and hug them up in person. And I try in my shaky way to tell them, as I've had through all of this, to tell them what they mean to us. And it is the family. It is our church family and the greater family of Christ that reached out to us, and they just kept holding us up and keeping our noses above water lest we drown.
Now, one part of the book that really did catch my attention, and you can explain this a little bit, it's In Our Lord's Hands. That's chapter 11 of the book, and page 257. It's right at the top here. I'm going to read pieces of it, and then you kind of explain this. But you said there was no reference to the Ten Commandments or to God that remained in federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. No one is compelled to place their hand on a Bible or to swear, so help me God, when taking the witness stand by declared that they would tell the truth. So you talked about this, and you talked about of the 100 witnesses that were involved in this and people involved, there was only one, and that was you that did that. What's happened here that we don't do that? Did they just completely throw out the rule of law? Or?
Absolutely. That was what I experienced, and I'd never been in trouble with the law, of course, before, but all during this time, I guess while we have allowed it to happen, the legal system has been so corrupted that they have removed references to the Ten Commandments from federal courthouses all across the land. And I was very surprised the first time that someone took the witness stand and did not say, "So help me God." I was appalled. And I suppose it might make it easier for someone to lie when they don't have to say, "So help me God." In my trial, FBI special agents routinely perjured themselves over and over again on the witness stand, as did members of the Capitol Police Force, the D.C. Police. They all lied. None of them ever had any contact with me. The DOJ lawyers falsified exhibits over and over again. And I talk about that in the book, and I have them, and I have the real stuff, too. And the DOJ threatened to jail witnesses if they testified to help defendants, not just me, but others, too. Evidence proving that I was innocent was blocked from the jury by prosecutors working with the judge. Now, I've gone out of my way to never say anything bad about the judge in my trial, but the things he did were not entirely legal. And if you're really trying to get to the truth of the matter, you should let actual evidence come in, not just crazy stuff that's being spewed by the mouths of wicked prosecutors. And by the way, the star witness for the prosecution against me and many of those people called the Oath Keepers was a guy named Abdullah Rashid. At the time, he had been, get this, convicted of aggravated sexual assault of a child. He traded his phony testimony against me and others for a new identity provided by the Biden government. Don't ask me where he is today. He might be living in the community of anybody who's listening to us. And with all the revelations being tamped down by the media about the Epstein files, the thread that connects the powerful people in government, high-tech banking, and international intrigue is child abuse and child sex trafficking, including in the DOJ of the early 2020s during the Oath Keepers trial.
Wow. Before we go to break here, again, tell people how they can find out more about this. The book's entitled The Mouths of the Wicked, and it's a true story of January 6th of corruption, persecution, survival, and victory. Thomas, how can people find out more about this book?
Well, thank you, Mark. You can go to puffinpublishers.com. That's P as in Papa, Puffin, Puffin, publishers.com. You can go right there. You can find out more, and you can order the book in paperback and ebook format right there.
All right. Well, folks, stay with us. We'll have more in just a moment.
Sharing your faith can be as easy as sharing your favorite radio station.
There's no greater way to share the gospel, to reach as many people as possible than through Christian radio.
Tell your friends where they can experience hope.
It's always pointed to Christ.
91.7 The Word.
Thanks for joining us today here on Crosspoint. Interesting conversation we're having with Thomas Caldwell. Now, Thomas was involved in the January 6, 2021 events that went on in Washington, D.C., but he got the short end of the stick here. And this book tells a pretty scary story, folks, in a way. Thomas, I'm looking at chapter 13, The Long March. You start off with the scripture there about you will not need to fight in the battle. Position yourselves, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord who is with you, 2 Chronicles 20:17. So there was a lot of persecution, involved a lot of torment. They demoralized you and punished you for stuff just before your beliefs. How did the salvation of the Lord show up for you?
Well, my faith in God continued to grow over time, at least in part because of the signs and wonders he provided. And that gave me an advantage over the enemy and perhaps an advantage over many others wrongfully persecuted during the J6 witch hunt. I will say this, that since I've gained some freedom, I've met J6ers who have found Jesus, who rekindled their faith by turning to him during all of this. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I have seen the deepest part of God's love for me and the darkest parts of my life. The tougher the situation, the more God revealed his love to me. And maybe only in those times when I was at rock bottom, I was the most receptive to his love. And I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of emotional here because this has been quite a journey for me. I was no Bible scholar. I believed, but I also know that sitting in a church pew once in a while doesn't make you a Christian any more than sitting in a garage makes you an automobile. You need to get into the Word, and you need to understand. And our God, our loving God, continued to show us so much compassion. Great example is here when I'm hurting so bad in prison, I actually said, God, no one no one knows what Sharon and I are suffering. No one. And it was that day that I managed to cajole a guard who I'd never seen before, maybe he was sent to me, into bringing me a tattered volume, the New King James. And I was so shivery cold the whole time I was in prison, and I sat down on that ice-cold floor, which was my combination bed and prayer closet, and I sat there in what we call Indian style, back when I was in elementary school, and I just let the good book fall open where it may. I didn't know where to start, find what I needed, the nourishment that I needed, and it fell open, and it fell open to Psalm 109. The mouths of the wicked and the mouths of the deceitful are open against me. They speak of me with a lying tongue. And the mouths of the wicked instantly, when I thought about it months later, instantly became the title of this book, because there was never any evidence to support this horrible thing that was done to Sharon and me. But in that moment, God says, nobody knows. Nobody knows what you're going through, my son. It was one of many signs. Sharon prayed with me on the telephone that was passed through a little slot in the door when we could get this blessed phone calls. And I talked about that before. One time she said, remember Philippians 4, 6, and 7. With thanksgiving, present your request to God. And so I said, okay, how am I going to find something to be thankful for in this mess when I'm bleeding out of parts of my body that little boys are not supposed to bleed out of? What do? And that's when I said, God, thank you for my darling wife, Sharon, and thank you that they haven't beaten the tar out of me today. And I smile about it now when I think of it, because I sort of picture God sitting there with his arms folded and said, at last, at last, you're following what I've tried to tell you. And that's just the start of so many things. Before we went to trial, there was a lady, one of the people that just started writing to us. Her name is Eileen. She lives in Somerville, South Carolina. She sent me a letter, the last letter I got before we had to get in the car and go to the start of that terrible trial. And she said, don't forget, you already have the victory. And don't feel discouraged if you don't have total victory right away. I mean, I couldn't understand that, but that is exactly what happened. Our ultimate victory came in stages. We didn't always get exactly what we prayed for, Sharon and I, but we did get peace, and God still hears prayers.
Yeah. Now, eventually, clemency was provided by President Trump to you last year. But up until then, tell people, how did you get out of there? I mean, what happened that was able for you to get out?
You mean to get out of prison?
Right.
Well, I mentioned the fact that we had Sharon had quite a hard time finding someone who would zealously represent me in this whole thing. Most people had drunk the Kool-Aid of the terrible media attacks and the false accusations. And then out of almost nowhere, and I always tell Sharon what I learned in the Navy, among many things, is that God has his hand in all this thing, everything that you're going through. Make sure you tell everybody you know what you're trying to do, because everybody knows a God. And sure enough, she talked to someone, actually my cousin, who lives over in Maryland, the People's Republic of Maryland, and she contacted someone who says, yeah, I know a criminal defense attorney. There was a guy named David W. Fisher, who's not only our attorney, he's our brother. He's a believer. And he was sent us. How would we have found him? We never heard of him. But once he got on the case, and it happened right at the time that I changed the way I prayed, to pray with thanksgiving. You can't make this stuff up. He came on the case. He met with Sharon one time. He drove 3.5 hours down to the jail to meet me. Through the bulletproof glass, I'm beaten up, I'm bleeding, I'm all chained up. He talks to me for about 10 minutes, and he says, Mr. Caldwell, I don't even like a lot of the people that I have to defend. There's murders and drug dealers and drunk drivers and all that stuff. He says, you know what? He says, I've talked to you for a couple of minutes. You're innocent. I don't need this case. I want this case. Let me help. And I said, sold American. Absolutely. It was a light. How would we have found him? But this was, in our opinion, Sharon and mine, another act of God. He said, "You're keeping the faith. Here, let me help you," and he did.
Yeah. So you have went through all of this. Now, there's surely some things in the back of your mind, especially early on when it's fresh and new. But what does unforgiveness look like to you today through all of this?
Well, I think unforgiveness is what people live in a lot of time. It would have been very easy. And look, I was quite angry. I was quite upset. When I first got out of jail, I thought, finally, I'm going to get my day in court. I'll be able to face these people down. But they didn't want that. They kept delaying so that they could pull all of their chicanery. And I would tell people who are sharing this conversation with us, living by the feud is only going to tear you apart. The Bible is very clear about forgiveness, and I tried to study on this a lot. There were many dark, lonely nights that I spent with my thoughts and with the Bible, trying to figure out, looking at myself and saying, God, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to build in me? And we talk about building character. I said out loud, God, how much doggone character do I have to develop? Will you please rescue me? And of course, Mark, just because you are a character doesn't mean you can't use a little bit more character. But forgiveness is essential. It's absolutely essential. And we're reminded of that over and over and over again. If you don't forgive, you can't actually step into your destiny. You have to, I would say to people this, forgiving does not let somebody off the hook. You're not saying, okay, yeah, you did this bad stuff. You should just go ahead and hurt someone else. No, I don't want people to hurt someone else. That's one of the reasons why I laid out their playbook in this book that I wrote. But I had to tear their claws out of me so that I wasn't carrying that burden. Forgiving is to give them forward to God, to give them forward. And, when they say, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, it doesn't mean simultaneously, but it means in the same way. And I came to understand that. When I was washed of my sin, Jesus didn't say, sure, Tom, I'll forgive all your sins, except for that stuff that you did between December of 76 and March of 77. That's going to take a little bit of time. No. He said completely, yes, you asked, there you go. And so in that same way, I had to let all of these trespasses and the terrible things that they did and the sadism, the psychopathic things that they did and the lies that they did and how they beat us down and they took almost everything we had except our faith and our love. I had to let that go. And when I did, it changed things for us. You talked about the pardon that I eventually got. I did not get pardoned on the inauguration night with everyone else, almost everyone else, by the president. No, there was a hit list that had been planned and prepared by the Department of Justice. The president could only sign what he was given. But there were 14 of us that were not put on that list. And, yeah, I felt myself getting angry again, but Sharon and I prayed about it. Again, we didn't get exactly what we wanted, but we tried to reach for God's peace, the peace of God which transcends all understanding. And when I let go, believe it or not, when I did, the pardon came in a matter of weeks after that. A singular pardon, a pardon only for me, signed by the president himself.
Yeah. Now, we know that this was lawfare, what they call that. And I know, too, that, Thomas, you being a Navy veteran and also being a Navy lieutenant commander, it had to hurt a little bit for you to be considered a domestic terrorist to the country you served and loved. I mean, that had to be pretty hard, too, on you.
It absolutely was tough. My entire adult life has been one of service. I am the 9th generation of Caldwell men who have chosen to serve in our military. And I served proudly overseas and here in the continental United States. and afloat, and to know that everything that you have worked on, everything that you have built, including your reputation, could be wiped away by the tyranny of evil men with a stroke of a pen and with a false arrest was incredibly painful. And yet, and this is gonna sound really, really crazy, but I think that I was privileged to see the glory of God in the depths of my despair. When things were worst, He was there. He was there for us. And yes, forever I am scarred with the modern-day equivalent of the Scarlet Letter, J6. I will always be a J6er. The fibs from the prosecutors that were repeated around the globe in the internet and all this, those things still exist, and they will probably always exist. But there's a difference between your reputation and what you really are in your heart. And so if there are people who always say, oh, Tom Caldwell, he was the commander of the Oath Keepers. No, I wasn't. He went in the Capitol. No, I didn't. He did all these things. No. In fact, we even won at trial eventually. It just took everything that we had. No, I would prefer that people say, here is a guy who's a Christian who has the courage of his convictions, who stood there. Although he stood through it in the storm, the Lord carried him through the darkest time. He's just a regular guy, and he's just going to go on about his life. I don't know what God is going to do, how he's going to use Sharon and me, but we've had some wonderful opportunities, not the least of which is being here with you today to tell about the goodness and the love of God and how he brought us through. We had no chance against these people on our own. We just didn't. And I wonder how many other people have gone through the same thing that we went through, not just from January 6th, but were falsely accused by Department of Justice's attorneys who were looking for a big bonus and a promotion. How many lives have been torn asunder?
Yeah. Well, again, tell people before we leave here, The Mouths of the Wicked, that's the book, how people can find out more about getting a copy of that.
Well, it's available in ebook and paperback format at puffinpublishers.com, Puffin like the seabird, Puffin, publishers.com. And it's called The Mouths of the Wicked, a true January 6th story of corruption, persecution, survival, and victory. I hope that you'll be engaged, enraged, and encouraged by the things that you read. And the word here that I want you to take forward is God still listens to our prayers. He still answers our prayers. He still heals, and he still saves. If you want to see a modern-day story of that, here's your chance.
Yeah, and as it says on the last page of your book, do you remember God can do anything? And he certainly did, and we're thankful he got you out of that pit and got you out today where your testimony is going to make a difference in people's lives.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Praise the Lord. He is so good.
Well, folks, that was a really good interview, different than most generally we have here on Crosspoint, but one of those areas that I've been looking for somebody that could tell us from a Christian standpoint of what happened on January the 6th, so people could take a look and hear from the depths of where all that happened at. Folks, boy, if you remember what Thomas said about getting that copy of that little New Testament and having a raggedy Bible to read was the life changer and the lifesaver for him. That Bible, and the book I hold in my other hand right now, that's the Word of God. That's what helps us get through these tough times like this that Thomas was talking about today, because it's encouragement, and it helps you get on down the road when it's hard to get down that road. It's the inspired words of God. It's where the essence of life can be discovered. The pages are never outdated of the Bible, and it will accurately direct your life. And it contains the most important words you're ever going to read, and you certainly ever need to be following. Be sure to join us again next time as, again, we discuss issues that are affecting the church. Have a great week. Allow God to use you for his purposes so that greater things can be done. Make your life count in God's plans for eternity. I'm Mark Taylor.
Crosspoint is a program produced in Studio 101 at KNEO Radio. Not all of the views on Crosspoint reflect those of the management or staff of KNEO. You may contact the Crosspoint program at 10827 Highway 86 East, Neosho, Missouri 64850, or by email crosspoint@kneo.org. You can hear Crosspoint 4 times a week, Saturday morning at 1, Saturday afternoon at 2, Saturday evening at 9, and Sunday evening at 7. You can also listen anytime online at kneo.org.